Everyone, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is a celebration of life to one of the greatest boxers of all time. When you think of great heavyweight boxers, of course, you'll say Muhammad Ali. You might say Jack Johnson. Hey, you may even say Mike Tyson. And all of those are correct. Those are great heavyweight boxers. But when you also consider like a top 10 list or a top 5 list or something like that, you have to include George Edward Foreman, or what we know as Big George Foreman, one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time. Unfortunately, his time here on Earth came to an abrupt end on March the 21st of 2025 when he passed away at the ripe young age of 76 years old. George Foreman is, I don't know. It's hard to really put a label on him because he accomplished so much throughout his life. Being a professional boxer, being an ordained minister, he even got into commentary after he stepped away from boxing, and then came back into boxing at a later age. I think he was in his late 40s, maybe even close to 50, and won the championship. Won the heavyweight championship of the world at that age, and it was phenomenal. And going on to be somewhat of an entrepreneur. If you don't know him from his boxing, you may know him from some movies that he popped up in throughout his career, throughout his life. And he also gave us the George Foreman grill. I know a lot of people had that. I still have a George Foreman grill in my house. We don't use it, but it's still there. It's old. That's why we don't use it. But it worked like a charm. It was a godsend, at least in my house. I can't speak for anybody else. Somebody coming from somebody who wasn't a gourmet chef, I could do some things on that George Foreman grill. Now, it isn't like he invented it or created the thing, but his name was attached to it, and the man has made an impact in every way possible throughout his life. And we're going to celebrate his life and go over a lot of those accomplishments that he had throughout his illustrious career, not only as a boxer, but as a businessman, as an author, and as an actor as well. He popped up in some films and TV shows. He even had a sitcom at one point. Didn't last long. I think it only lasted for like one season, maybe two. And maybe, but it didn't last that long. But he's done a lot. And after that, of course, we like to review a film related to the topics that we talk about here on Movie Goodness. And of course, we're going to talk about a film that just came out, 2 years ago, which is an autobiography about his life. The 2023 film, Big George Foreman. So we're going to review that film that I didn't watch until 2 days ago when he unfortunately passed away. And I always put it on the back burner. I'm like, oh, I'll watch it one day. And then when the news broke about his passing, and it was random. I don't know if the algorithm read it or knew of this, but I opened up my TV app, and the first thing to pop up was Big George Foreman. I was like, well, I might as well watch it today. Today's the day. And I finally got around to watching that film, and we're going to review it at the end of this show. But let's go over the life of George Edward Foreman, who was born on January the 10th, 1949, passed away on March the 21st, 2025. He was a professional boxer, a businessman, a minister, an author. In boxing, he competed in the ring from 1967 to 1997, and he earned the nickname Big George. He was a two-time world heavyweight champion and an Olympic gold medalist. He has the namesake of the George Foreman grill, as we all know. After the bit of a troubled childhood, we should say, George Foreman took up amateur boxing and won a gold medal in the heavyweight division in 1968 Summer Olympics. Having turned professional the next year, he won the heavyweight title with a stunning second round knockout of then undefeated Joe Frazier in 1973. He defended the belt twice after suffering his first professional loss to Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle in 1974. Unable to secure another title opportunity, George Foreman retired after losing to Jimmy Young in 1977. Following what he referred to as a born-again experience, George Foreman became an ordained Christian minister. 10 years later, he announced a comeback, and in 1994, at the age of 45 years old. Now, let me explain something to y'all. My birthday was just a couple of days ago, and I just turned 46. So, at 45 years of age, this man won the unified WBA IBF heavyweight championship belts by knocking out then 26 years old Michael Moore. And I say that because I'm 46 right now, just a couple of days removed from 45, the age that he won these belts. I couldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight right now. I couldn't. I got one good punch in me. I think that's all I have. If you can survive that first punch from me, you probably got me. I'm gonna go ahead on and tap out immediately because I know that I just don't have it in me. But this man, and I remember watching that fight with my dad. As a matter of fact, I believe my uncle had came over by the house too to watch the fight, and they were nostalgic for it because they watched George Foreman, coming through the ranks. They actually watched him around this time. This is like some of the first fights I've seen, live of George Foreman. I've seen clips of him up to that point, but I've never actually seen him fight from opening bell on. And that fight was, I felt bad for him because he was 45, but he looked about 60, compared to this 26-year-old young whippersnapper who's the champion at this point. I think Michael Moore had beat Evander Holyfield, if I'm not mistaken, for those belts. And it was like, man, why are they putting George Foreman in the ring with this guy? And for the first few rounds, he was brutalizing George Foreman. I mean, it just looked sad. It just looked so sad. And then out of the blue, it felt like George Foreman threw just a pair of two-punch combinations that looked like nothing. But when you really think about it in its totality, this is a big dude. George Foreman he was a big guy. And those punches landed flush and just laid Michael Moore completely out. And he couldn't answer the count. And George Foreman became the heavyweight champion of the world at the age of 45. It was unbelievable. That was the first time that, watching the fight with my dad and uncle, and they just celebrated, boy. I mean, you would have thought that I won the belt the way my dad was jumping around, or he won the belt the way they were jumping around in the front room. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience, and I was so happy for the man. And George Foreman defied all the odds, defied Father Time, and accomplished this goal. And from that point on, going forward, George Foreman always had a special place in my heart for that. And a different level of respect, to be honest with you, because not too many people could do that. Not too many people have the guts to stand in the ring and do that. Yeah, you've seen in other sports older players play but their body's not taking as much punishment as a boxer. A boxer, that's straight punishment, man. Those are highly trained assassins, man. These are guys who have been training since they were early teens, maybe even younger than that, in the ring. And he's getting in a ring with a guy half his age almost, and is the champion. And he survived. I forgot how many rounds. I got it marked when we get down lower to the talking about him, but uh, he survived it and came out on top. It was just the most miraculous thing I ever saw in my life. Didn't mean to spend much time on that, but it's so amazing to sit back and think about that fight. That is one of my favorite fight watching moments I have ever experienced. One, because of my dad and my uncle, and the atmosphere that was in the house when that happened. But the other thing was just thinking about how this man did what he did at his age. It was amazing. Now, he didn't go on to defend the title 20 different times after that. I think he relinquished the title after that. I know he relinquished one of the belts because it was unified. I think it was 3 belts in total, but he relinquished one rather than face a mandatory title defense. And then he did successfully defend the other 2 titles against I forgot the guy's name, but he beat him. He did beat him. And George Foreman, at that point, he had relinquished the IBF title as well the year later. And at the age of 46 and 169 days old, he was the oldest world heavyweight champion in history. And that is just awesome, man. That this dude was that old, still winning. He had to win. It wasn't like he came out of retirement and went straight into that championship match with Michael Moore. No, he actually had to win some fights to earn that championship opportunity, and he did it, and went on to defend those belts, well, at least a couple of those belts, a couple of times after that. So he was still able to just be big George Foreman at that age, and after taking that much time off from boxing, a good 20 years, and to get back in and do it and still do what he do, man, that hats off, man. George Foreman was the oldest ever to win the heavyweight championship and of any major honors, and the second oldest of any weight class after Bernard Hopkins did it as a light heavyweight. What that was, it was a few years ago. It just weren't too long ago that Bernard Hopkins did it, but Bernard Hopkins was also in his 40s, but he was a light heavyweight, not a heavyweight. George Foreman, he did eventually retire in 1997 at the age of 48 years old with a final record of 76 wins, 68 by knockout. You do the math, people. That dude was amazing, and he only had 5 losses in his entire career. One of the famous losses came at the hands of Muhammad Ali, who hit him with a lightning flash 1-2 combination, which was the fastest punch George Foreman has ever seen, according to him. He's never seen that punch come out of that fast, come out of nowhere and just knock him out. George Foreman was inducted into the World Boxing Hall of Fame and International Boxing Hall of Fame. The International Boxing Research Organization rates George Foreman as the 8th greatest heavyweight of all time. In 2002, he was named one of the 25 greatest fighters of the past 80 years, according to The Ring magazine. The Ring ranked him as the 9th greatest puncher of all time. He was a ringside commentator, I should say, for HBO's boxing coverage for 12 years until 2004. Outside boxing, Foreman was a successful entrepreneur and known for his promotion of the George Foreman Grill, which has sold more than 100 million units worldwide by 2011. In 1999, he sold the commercial rights to the George Foreman grill for $138 million. George Foreman was born in Marshall, Texas. He grew up in the Fifth Ward community of Houston, Texas, with his six siblings. Although he was raised by J.D. Foreman, who his mother had married when George was a small child, his biological father was Leroy Moorhead. By his own admission in his autobiography, George was a troubled youth. He dropped out of school at the age of 15 and spent time as a mugger. Yes, he went around robbing people. And so at the age of 16, George Foreman had a change of heart and convinced his mother to sign him up for Job Corps after seeing an ad for the Corps on television. As part of Job Corps, George Foreman earned his GED. He trained to become a carpenter and a bricklayer as well. After moving to Pleasanton, California, with the help of a supervisor, he began to train. He was interested in football because he idolized Jim Brown, who was the running back for the Cleveland Browns, ironically enough, around that time. So he wanted to be a football player, but he gave it all up for boxing. Touching in on his faith, as a youth, George Foreman, he grew up largely without the presence of religion in his life. After a boxing match with heavyweight Jimmy Young, Foreman was in the locker room and suddenly felt that he was dying. He thought he was about to die. So in turn, wanting to survive, of course, he prayed. He prayed to God and offered to donate his prize money from the boxing match to charity. When he heard a voice said, "I don't want your money, I want you." That was a quote that he wrote in his autobiography. He went on to say, and this is a quote, of course, "Then a giant hand plucked him into consciousness. Foreman found himself in the locker room table, surrounded by friends and staff members. He felt as if as if he was physically filled with the presence of a dying Christ. He felt his forehead bleeding, punctured by the crown of thorns, just like Jesus. And his wrist, he believed, had been pierced by nails on the cross. So I knew that Jesus Christ was coming alive in me," George Foreman said. "I ran into the shower and turned on the water, and hallelujah, I was born again. I kissed everybody in the locker room and told them I loved them. That happened on March of 1977, and I never have been the same again." George Foreman stated that in a crisis experience, he became a born-again Christian. Following this, HBO boxing commentator Larry Merchant commented that there was a transformation from a young, hard character who felt a heavyweight champion should carry himself with menace to a very affectionate personality. George Foreman was welcomed by members of the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ, a holiness Pentecostal church in Houston, Texas, where he eventually became the pastor in 1980. Under his leadership, the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ opened the George Foreman Youth and Community Center in order to minister to children and adolescents in that area. George Foreman declared that, "I'm always studying the Bible," and stated that the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. George Foreman led 3 church services a week in which he aimed to reveal something about the Bible that they being his congregation didn't know. George Foreman opted that it didn't matter what you achieved, what you accomplish in this life. The most important thing is to keep your eye on the true prize, and that's serving God. When it comes to film and television, George Foreman has popped up on a few things throughout his career. In 1975, he had a guest starring role on The $6 Million Man. The next year, he popped up on Sanford and Son. In 1992, he appeared on Home Improvement, one of my favorite shows back in the early 90s. And in 1993, they gave him his own show, George, on ABC, which ran for one season. And I know why, because I remember watching a couple of episodes and I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. But it's funny, the year after that, that's when he went back to boxing and won the championship. So that just goes to show you, if that show had succeeded, he never would have went back and won the championship. So it all worked out. It all worked out to the good. He also did voice work on King of the Hill in 2003. Also, he popped up on the just recently, about 2 years ago, on The Masked Singer. He was one of the contestants there. I think that was in 2022. So he stayed busy throughout his life and career. Another interesting tidbit about George Foreman that always tickled my fancy, that always made me laugh because, I didn't understand why. But once again, it's life lessons. You have to read. You have to you have to learn things before you go to assume things. Because I just thought the man was full of himself for doing what we're about to talk about. But when he gave his explanation, I was like, man, that is brilliant. I really loved what he said about this. George Foreman, he was married to Mary Joan, uh, from 2000. I'm sorry, from 1985 until her death. He had four previous marriages before that, but that's not the part that I'm kind of focused on. The other part is George Foreman had not one, not two, not even three, but 12 children. 12, five sons and six daughters. Now, that's not too crazy, because uh, uh, I come from a big family, not like that, but I mean, because we only had a household of four, as far as my siblings, but uh, prior to that, my uncles and aunties and all that, it was a group. It was a lot of them. They come from the country, so that's all they did. But in any event, it wasn't the fact that he had 12 children. It wasn't the fact that he had five sons. It was the fact that his five sons are George Jr., George the Third, George the Fourth, George the Fifth, and George the Sixth. All five of his sons are named George. And I always was like, why? It made no sense to me. Why would you name all your sons George? And out of his seven daughters, one of them are named Georgette. And so he had to sneak one in for the girls too. So I wondered, why did he do that? I always thought he was just full of himself. He just loved himself so much that he threw that name on all his children. And it's just weird. But this is his explanation that he gave. He explained, I named all my sons George Edward Foreman so they would always have something in common. I said to them, if one of us go up, then all of us go up together. If one of us go down, we all go down together. That is the most gangster explanation you could ever get. That is fire, because that's pretty much saying we're in this together. We're a family, and that's something that you don't see instilled in a lot of households these days. And I thought that was just excellently put. And now, is it true? I mean, I can only go by what he said. And see, it's true. That's why he did it. But I just find that intriguing to me. That is very cool that he named all his sons George, and all of them have the same, uh, not the same goals in life, but they all try to achieve something in life, for the betterment of the entire family, because we're in this together. I think that's cool. Just to be fair, his seven daughters, you have Nadia, Lola, Frida, who tragically she tried to get into boxing. She was a boxer. She retired in 2001, but unfortunately in 2019 she died at the age of 42 of an apparent suicide. So that was pretty sad. And I think one of his sons tried to get into boxing or is trying to get into boxing, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, Frida, you have Georgetta, Isabella, Courtney, and Michi. And so, yeah, those are all his children, all 12 of his children. I think Isabella Foreman, she is a blogger. I think you could probably look her up. She does blogs. Anyways, yeah, George Foreman, man. George Foreman was an icon. He was truly one of the greats, not only in the ring but out of the ring. I mean, he was just, it's something about him. It was that smile he had. It was just the way he carried himself. This big, just lumbering beast of a human being, but was essentially a big teddy bear, but he wasn't always that way. It took an event to change his life in order for him to go down a different road, because he was not a upstanding citizen, if you will, you know, prior to that near death experience that he had that completely changed his life and uh, uh, turned him into the man that we knew and loved later in the second half of his life. But George Foreman passed away on March the 21st, 2025 in Houston, Texas at the hospital, which is crazy because I was just in Houston last weekend, you know. And granted, it wasn't like I had any opportunity to see him, any chance to see him or something like that, but it's just weird for it to be like that close to me. It just felt weird when I found that out. But either way it go, um, R.I.P. to a king, a true icon, a true legend. George Foreman, man, he will be missed. He was truly one of the greats. I haven't sat down and did a list, so I got to go by the list that they gave. That we talked about earlier, that he was the eighth best here or in the top 10 here and whatnot. I really, you know, off the top of my head can't rattle off a lot of names, but the names that I can rattle off, I can only get as far as maybe four, before I get to George Foreman. And in some cases, he's higher than that, It's so, uh, it's fair. At least he's in the top 10. I can 100% agree with that. He was truly one of the best. We can settle on that, can we? We can we can settle on that. He was one of the best. Without putting a number next to it, he was one of the best. And so, R.I.P. to George Foreman, man. My prayer, my condolences go out to the Foreman family. He was awesome. He was an awesome fella. And so let's go over the film that best chronologizes George Foreman's life. And that is Big George Foreman, which came out in 2023. That film was directed by George Tillman Jr. It is considered a Christian sports film, sports drama, if you will. And it just tells the life of George Foreman. It starts off with him as a youth and on to he won the heavyweight championship for the second time. George Foreman in this film is played by Chris Davis. Um, I remember them filming this movie because they filmed this movie in New Orleans. I want to say in 2022, and they were all around. I think it went under a different title around that time, but I was like, wait, they doing a George Foreman movie? I was all in. I couldn't wait for it, and I still end up not going to see. The honest thing is the trailers didn't really grab me. It didn't look intriguing. Nothing there screamed, I have to run to the theater to go see it. Um, did I get it wrong? Was I wrong for feeling that way after watching it the other day? No, I'm not. I'm not wrong by that. This was it was all right. To be honest with you, this movie, there's nothing about this movie that captured me. Nothing that I first and foremost I didn't already know about George Foreman. Being a big fan of his, it was really nothing new. The one thing, the one I guess the glaring thing, which is the basis of this movie, George Foreman for the majority of his young life was not a spiritual person. He did not believe in God. And I didn't know that, because I'm coming in at a period, me being in existence, I'm around a time when George Foreman was always a religious person, a spiritual person, not so much religious, but a spiritual person. And it wasn't like George Foreman was preachy or walking around here with a Bible in his hand, just preaching to people all the time. But you knew he was a spiritual person. And I didn't know that other side. And so, if anything, that's what I wanted to see in this movie. Now, they did do that in this movie, but they really kind of tiptoed around it more as diving into it. And you know what I'm saying? I wanted it to really show that turn, to really feel invested in that revelation that he had, and I didn't feel that. It was cool to watch it. If that's the story, that's the story. But it just didn't have the impact that I was hoping it would have. Maybe because once again, I knew the story. It's at this point, I knew the story, so it didn't really hit home as if I didn't know. Now, people who didn't know his story, it probably hit them harder, But for me, it didn't quite get there for me. But overall, the movie was decent. I actually like Chris Davis in this role. I didn't know anything of Chris Davis, who portrays George Foreman in this film. I've seen him in a couple of things. Prior to this, I know he was in Judas and the Black Messiah. I've seen him on TV shows. I think he was in Atlanta, or on Atlanta. The Donald Glover show. I think I seen him on a couple of episodes of that, but nothing that I was like, oh man, Chris Davis. That wasn't the selling point for me because I didn't know who he was. But I think he did a pretty good job as George Foreman. He really embodied George Foreman. There were times in this film that I believed he was George Foreman. I thought he did that good of a job as this larger than life figure that we all know. I was trying to catch the name of the young man who plays the younger George Foreman, but I missed it, and I thought I put it in my notes, but I didn't. But it is what it is. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna go after and read it and find it, and I'm gonna regret not saying his name. But he did a good job. I really liked him. I liked him a lot. You could tell he's a kid. This is probably his first or second little role or whatever, but for the most part, I thought he did really good, to really capturing that anger that George Foreman has as a youth, as this poor and broke young man having to go to school with duct tape around his shoes because he doesn't, his family doesn't have money, don't have lunch, because his family don't have food to eat and he's hungry, and kids all around him or eating their lunch, and he has to sit there, and it was just brutal to watch, and you see him getting bullied and him just breaking, and beating kids up, because he was angry at this point, that turns to anger, and that's a whole other commentary that needs to be expressed when people talk about these young people who are coming from poverty-stricken communities, how they act and how they conduct themselves. They're mad. You know, they're mad, and especially when they see other kids, their peers, uh, uh doing better than them. It's one thing for adults. And I know I'm going on this tangent. We're supposed to be talking about this movie, but hey, it's on the brain now. You see, it's easy for adults to kind of adjust to it, even though some don't. Most don't. Let me take that back. Most don't. You control your own destiny here for the most part. With the job that you get, the way you budget yourself. The things that you buy, stuff like that. You control all that. But as far as a kid has no control over the finances, over what they can buy, what they can wear, what they can eat. That's up to the parents, and the parents are doing the best they can for the most part to provide for their children, but you know, it still isn't enough in the eyes of children because they're looking at their friends in the classroom, and they got on the new Jordans, they got on, they got their hair done and all this other stuff and got fresh haircuts and new fits on and all this other stuff, and you got to sit there with pro rings with the Velcro straps on. You know what I'm saying? So it's frustrating for children, and not to make excuses for, because honestly, they are still knucklehead children. It don't matter if they got money or not. There are knucklehead children who are running around here still being idiots. And so I'm not talking about them, but I am talking about the ones who are truly going through mental health issues because of where they're coming from and the struggle in the household. You think that's not affecting kids? Of course that's affecting kids. And so, to revert back to this movie, yes, you see that trauma played a part in George Foreman's upbringing, which led him to channel that anger in the boxing ring. And they did a good job with that. Like I said, the movie is not bad. It's a good movie. It's just nothing that I would have ran out to go see. I'm glad that I watched it in the format that I did watch it on television. I did enjoy it for the most part. Forrest Whitaker as Doc Broadus did a good job. Forrest Whitaker is just the dude's a national treasure. Once again, one of these other actors that just is solid in everything that he's in. It doesn't matter the scale of the film. He just does solid work. George Tillman Jr., the director of this film, I'm a fan of his. I like the movies that he has put out throughout his career. Soul Food, Men of Honor, Faster, that film with Dwayne The Rock Johnson. Sneaky good movie. Sneaky good movie. I would say a guilty pleasure. It's not awesome, but it's sneaky good movie. He also did The Hate You Give, which was Lord, what's her name? I can't think of her name now. I'm blanking on it, but that was a good movie from 2018. He does some good movies, solid movies. Nothing that'll blow your socks off, but it's pretty decent. And this film, I think he was a good director to kind of shepherd this movie in. Big George Foreman, the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world, gets a letter grade of a C. Yeah, it's average. It's pretty. It's decent. It's worth a watch. And for the inspirational aspect of it all, it depicting that turn that he has, that life-changing event that happened in his life, that led him on his spiritual journey, the fight to get back in the ring and win the championship at the age of 45 years old. Amazing. It's an amazing story, and I understand why they chose to tell this story. I wish it would have been more to it. It just felt like something was left on the floor, like something was left on the page that didn't quite make it on the screen. And it's a little frustrating because this should have been a bigger deal, because this is a big story, no pun intended, that should have been told in a grander scale. But for what we got, it was decent and it was watchable. But what wasn't decent and watchable, it was a complete contrast to that. Something grander in scale was the life of the actual big George Foreman. Um, this dude is an inspiration, man. He truly was. His life needs to be studied and and just uh, I'm serious, man. This he needs to have his life story taught in schools. Even though I know that's not going to happen with this administration, but it is an amazing story to tell. For those of us who have children, small children, you want to read something to them, you want to tell them stories, look up George Foreman's story and talk to him about this man. I'm telling you, man, these are the stories that need to be taught and you know told around the world. Not about, well, let me shut up. But anyways, R.I.P. to George Foreman, one of the greatest boxers of all time. Not just heavyweight boxers, but boxers altogether. He was one of the greats, man. He will be missed. Um, I would like to know, what is your favorite George Foreman fight? George Foreman story? George Foreman anything? Is it the grill? What impact hit your home? Because he hit your home in some shape, form, or fashion, whether it was watching one of his matches or grilling on one of his grills. Or watching him on television in some shape, form, or fashion. George Foreman didn't touch every house in the world. I want to know, how did he affect your life? Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget about YouTube. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this celebration of life for one George Foreman. May he rest in peace. Want you all to know that I love you, continue to love everyone, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.